Oh, what have you done? Let me see it. Oh, yes, you've done it. Thalia, your dad's going to need a bandage. Could you get him a bandage, please? You know, Daddy hammered the finger instead of the nail.
Here you go, Daddy. Let me see it. Yeah, it looks pretty bad. Gotta go play.
She sounds very concerned, doesn't she?
Hey, Daddy, why don't you try this?
Ouch. John, where are you? John, girls, I fell in the driveway and I think I sprained my wrist. There you are.
What happened?
You know that stupid crack in the driveway that should have been fixed ages ago? I tripped on it.
Well, hopefully it'll get a little bit better here. Thalia.
Yeah, it looks like it hurts, Mom. Ouch. I learned how to make a sling at school last week. I made one for you.
Well, hopefully that'll get better. If not, we'll see the doctor tomorrow.
Hey, Mama, why don't you try this?
Come on, girls, leave the clock. What on earth have you done to yourself now?
Oh, I was playing basketball and I just pulled a hamstring. It's a silly accident.
Ouch! Double ouch!
You kind of look silly. Oh, no! You'll embarrass me at my choir concert tomorrow night.
This crutch will work.
Oh.
Hey, Daddy, why don't you try this? It's really supposed to help.
What's with all the clocks, Kinsey?
Well, yesterday in a book at school, we read that time heals all wounds. So, clocks.
Well, wait a minute. I don't know if that's really going to help right now. Why don't you go grab something?
Why don't you ask him? Jesus is the real healer of all wounds.
We need a stage manager up here. This week, there must have been at least 5 or 6 people who knew that I was doing the preaching and asked me the question, what's the cliche for this week? And when I responded, the cliche is time heals all wounds, I got quite a number of different responses to that. Some people laughed in scorn. Some people gave a little snort. And some people got a little tear in their eye. The cliche that is so often spoken at times of wrenching pain in our lives, time heals all wounds. But is it true? Does time really heal all wounds? I remember some years ago in an interview that was taking place on television, Rose Kennedy was commenting a few years after two of her sons had been assassinated. She said, "It has been said that time heals all wounds, but I disagree. Time does not heal all wounds. In time," she said, "the mind, in order to preserve its sanity, covers our wounds with scars, and the pain lessens, but it never, ever seems to go away completely." She's right, isn't she? Time does not really heal all wounds, but there is something that time can do. Time can help us to take our wounds and place them in the context of the greater story of life. And that can happen because in each of us there is a hallway of memory. And on the walls of that hallway are hung portraits of experiences we have had and lessons that we have learned and people that we have known. And these memories shape us into the people that we are. These memories determine the way in which we will respond when we are faced with life's wounds. These memories help to build the faith that we have in Jesus that sustains us in our day-to-day following of him. We make a little trip down that hallway of memory whenever some difficult circumstance comes to our life, whenever there is some horrendous thing happening on the national scene or on the world scene. We go down that pathway, that hallway of memory. And I think that is exactly what the writer of the book of Hebrews was doing in our text for this morning and in some of the verses that went before and come after the text that we have read this morning. The writer of the book of Hebrews was making a trip down his or her own hallway of faith memory. And the writer of Hebrews was doing that because the book of Hebrews is really an extended sermon that was preached by somebody we don't know who. I noticed the introduction the girls had been given this morning said Paul, but nobody knows whether it was Paul or whether it was Priscilla or who it was. But he or she gave an extended sermon to a congregation made up of Hebrew Christians who had become dispirited about the circumstances in their life. We don't know exactly what those circumstances were, but what we do know is that their confidence had been shaken, their spirits had been wounded, and their faith in Jesus had begun to waver. In truth, they had developed a spirit of ennui, that spirit that simply says, I just don't care anymore. I just don't care anymore. And in order to help them with that attitude, their pastor, the writer of Hebrews, had led them down this little trip on the through the hallway of their memory. It was a hallway on which hung portraits of Abraham and Sarah, of Jacob and Joseph, of Moses and Joshua, of Miriam and Hannah, of Ruth and Esther. Upon that wall were hung portraits of prophets and priests and kings and people of all ilk, whose lives had been lived in such a way that the writer of Hebrews was able to say of them that they were people of whom God did not need to be ashamed, because they had lived their life facing difficulties but not giving up, constantly marching toward the eternal purposes of God. The writer of Hebrews, their Hebrew preacher, thought it was important for them to look at these pictures that were up and down the hallway of their memory, because these were portraits of people whose blood ran in their very veins. But the Hebrew preacher believed there was one portrait hanging in that hall of memory that was more important than all of the rest put together. It was the last portrait hung on the wall. It was way down there at the end of the hall, and you had to go a long ways in order to stand before it. But you know, I imagine, whose portrait that was. He believed that the most important portrait hanging on that wall was the portrait of Jesus. He was concerned because it seemed to him that the people in this Hebrew congregation had somehow lost their faith in Jesus, had forgotten about Jesus. Oh, they knew the name of Jesus, and once in a while they prayed to Jesus, but no longer was Jesus the driving force in their life. No longer was Jesus the example by which they lived their lives. No longer did they sing with confidence the line from that old hymn, "Oh, Jesus, I have promised to serve you to the end." Once they had sung that hymn with gusto, but now they couldn't even remember the tune. And you have to wonder, how does that happen? How in the world could it have happened that the flame of faith that had been burning so brightly earlier in their life had now become nothing but a flickering ember? How did it happen to those people in that Hebrew congregation? And how in the world does it happen to us? Because it does sometimes happen to us as it did to those Hebrew people. Maybe it happened and happens because we have somehow confused knowledge and value. I have spoken to you before in a message about that wonderful little book that's in our church library across the hallway here, entitled The Education of Little Tree. I highly recommend it to you. It tells the story of a little boy whose parents were killed in an automobile accident, and then he had to go and live and be raised by his grandparents, who lived in the back hill country of Tennessee. They were mountain people. And in this book, this little tree tells the story of the people that he met as he was growing up and the education he received from those Tennessee mountain people. He said the world looked upon them with a bit of scorn. They were not sophisticated people, but he said They taught him everything he needed to know about life. And in the book, he talks about some of these people. One of them was a man by the name of Mr. Wine, who said to Little Tree one day, "There are two parts to becoming educated. One part is knowledge, and the other part is value." He said the knowledge part has to do with remembering all kinds of facts and figures and formulas. The value part has to do with learning what really matters in life. What's really important in life? What is really of value in life? And Mr. Wine said to Little Tree, if you do not get the value part right, the knowledge part will not be of any use to you. It's something like the experience of the young man in the Gospels who came to Jesus one day whining about his brother. Their father had died and left an inheritance. And this young man came to Jesus saying to him, "Jesus, Master, bid my brother divide the inheritance with me." But it didn't work, because it never works to tell Jesus what to do. Maybe you have discovered that in your life. It never works to tell Jesus what to do. And so Jesus didn't do it. But he said to this young man, "I have something I want to tell you. I won't divide your inheritance, because I didn't come to do that kind of thing. But I want to say to you, be careful about greed, because a person's life does not consist in the abundance of their possessions." And the gospel writer says that this young man went away sulking, sad, and wounded. And I want to tell you that time will not heal that kind of wound. The only thing that will heal that kind of wound is to make that trip down that long hallway of memory and stand before that portrait of Jesus, look Jesus in the eye, and ask the question, what did Jesus value? And what do I value? What did Jesus spend his life doing? And what am I spending my life doing? What was important to Jesus? And what is important to me? Or maybe the reason our lamp of faith is wavering just a bit, flickering and almost to go out, is because we have taken on too much of the world's pain, too many of our neighbor's burdens, too much of the creation's travail. Oh, I know that a major part of the Christian life is bearing one another's burdens. What's the use of being a Christian if we're not at work trying to help hurting people? But even Jesus had moments when he experienced compassion fatigue. Even Jesus had moments when he had to go away into the wilderness by himself and engage in deep prayer in order to keep his relationship with God alive and his Christian life effective. Even Jesus had to do those things. And maybe, just maybe, we find ourselves as a congregation this very morning in that place. Because nobody has to tell you, that there's been a great deal of grief and pain in our congregation's life in the last year. There have been people who have been very, very sick for a very long time. And we have done what we could do. We went trekking to nursing home, to hospital, to homes filled with pain. We went carrying prayers and flowers and food and love. And we wanted to go. We needed to go. We had to go. But it's important for us to recognize that the going takes something out of us. And we have been going. And maybe we've been going so long that we're exhausted and our zest for the Christian life has begun to waver just a little. Nobody has to tell you that we have had more deaths in the life of this congregation in the last few months than we can possibly handle. Nobody has to tell you that we've all stood at too many open graves. We've all attended too many funerals. We've all helped with too many funeral receptions. And we wanted to do it. And we needed to do it. And we did it. And we will continue to do it. But somehow doing it takes a little something out of us. And we get tired. And the lamp that burns so brightly begins to flicker a little. It's not going to go out, but it's flickering just a little. And we ourselves are wounded. And I want to tell you again that time will not heal those wounds. The only way that we can be healed from wounds like those is to make that long trip down the hallway to that portrait that hangs at the very end and stand there before the portrait of Jesus in deep prayer and remember that Jesus never asks us to do anything that he was not willing to do himself. Jesus never asks us to do anything that he is not willing to do himself. Or maybe the reason that our fire of faith sometimes burns down to a flickering ember is because we have allowed ourselves to drop into the habit of gauging every experience we have in life by the mantra, I like it, I don't like it. And if we like it, we're willing to do it. If we don't like it, we're not so willing to do it. If we feel like it, we're willing to do it. If we don't feel like it, we're not willing to do it. It's the great disease of our modern society, isn't it? We only do those things that are fun. We only do the things we feel like doing. we only do the things we like to do. Part of it is it's the legacy of the psychotherapy movement that has been trying to set us free from the tyranny of all the wants, of all the oughts and shoulds and musts of life. Our society has lost the concept of the common good, and we have been led down a path that has taught us that the only thing that matters is what we like, what we want, what we feel like doing. But here's the thing. When we became a follower of Jesus Christ, we became a part of a community. We call that community church. And when you're a part of a community, there are some things that you do whether or not you like them. There are some things we do whether or not we happen to like it. There are some things that we do because we're a part of the community, and we do them whether we feel like doing them or not, because they must be done in order to keep our faith strong and our community alive. It's something like the prayer that one of my seminary professors tried to instill within young ministers who were filled with the glow and fire of entering the ministry, but he knew that one day they were going to go home and be exhausted and wonder if it was all worth it. And he tried to instill within all of us this prayer. Oh Lord, I thank you for work to do that is more important than how I happen to feel about it at any given moment. Oh Lord, I thank you for work to do that is more important than how I happen to feel about it at any given moment. It's a dangerous thing to live life by the mantra of I like it, I don't like it, I feel like it, I don't feel like it. Because inevitably, we will end up sorrowful, sad, sulking, and wounded. And time will not heal wounds like that. The only thing that will heal our wounds, and we're all wounded in one way or another, the only thing that will heal our wounds is to take that journey down the hall of memory and stand before that portrait way down there at the end. And if we do that, we will notice that underneath that portrait, there is a little plaque. And the plaque reminds us that we are looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross and is seated at the right hand of God. If we are willing to stand before that portrait and keep our eyes focused there, our wounds will be healed. Our Christian life will be stronger. Our faith in God and in Jesus Christ will be reignited, because we will remember that Jesus ran the race with perseverance, and so can we. Jesus carried the cross without giving up, and so can we. Jesus has taken his place in the presence of God, and so will we. So will we. Will you pray with me? O most tender and gentle Lord Jesus, teach us so to contemplate you, that we may become like you and love you sincerely and simply as you have loved us. Amen.